In this video, we'll deliver the knockout blow to the critics' claim that Greece is the Fourth Empire. Reminder to hit the subscribe button below and turn on the notification bell to stay up to date as new videos come out. And if you're interested in supporting this ministry, just go to justscripture.org and click on the support page. Chapter 8 is the last chapter in Daniel that involves symbolic visions that are connected to the four Gentile empires. Chapters 9 through 12 will be strictly verbal in their prophetic descriptions, but will still contain the challenging task of interpreting some of its cryptic language. Chapter 8 also moves us out of our Aramaic chiasm and back into the Hebrew for the remainder of the book. Here the focus shifts from Gentile empires to the Jews and what their experience will be under that oppression. Chapter 8 can be viewed in two halves. First, Daniel receives his second set of visions that covers all the way to verse 14. Then he will receive the interpretation of those visions from an angel. But something that won't be discussed in this chapter is God's future kingdom. This will come of use to us when discussing the critic's position later on. But for right now, we are going to cover chapter 8 in two parts. For today, we will focus in on the vision of the ram and goat. Then, in part 2, we will cover everything about the little horn and his identification. Since chapter 8 doesn't discuss God's kingdom, we will only need to find out with what empires do the ram and goat align with. Verse 1. In the third year of the reign of King Belshazzar, a vision appeared unto me, even unto me, Daniel, after which appeared unto me at the first. As noted in the verse, this vision comes to Daniel in the third year of Belshazzar in 551 BC. You can see there is still 12 years before the fall of Babylon in 539 BC, so we are still in the time period with Babylon ruling as a superpower in the Near East. Daniel even said that this came after the first one that appeared to him, in reference back to chapter 7's visions. And once again, he wrote in the first person tense for internal attestation that the visions were authentic and coming directly from Daniel himself. Now, if this was coming from a 2nd century BC author or authors, then this would be a lie and the book would not be prophetic and would have never been entered into the Hebrew canon. Verse 2. And I saw in a vision, and it came to pass, when I saw that I was at Susa in the palace, which is in the province of Elam, and I saw in a vision, and I was by the river of Ulai. This vision is different from that of chapter 7's. Daniel says that he realized that he was in Susa, meaning that he was translated from likely Babylon to this location in an instant while awake. Both Young and Keel recognize that Daniel was wide awake during this. And the last verse in chapter 8 seems to indicate that he was translated immediately back after the vision was given, and then he got sick for a few days, and then he went back to work in Belshazzar's court in Babylon. This type of translating has occurred to Ezekiel a few times in his ministry, and also to Philip immediately after he baptized the Ethiopian eunuch. Now, we've seen numerous internal reasons for dating the book early, because some of the things can only be made sense of if it was coming from an eyewitness and not somebody 400 years after the fact. In verse 2, there are two more indicators that can be added to the list. One is the description of Susa in the province of Elam, and the other is the mentioning of the river Ulai. Daniel's saying that Susa was in the province of Elam is of historical significance because he is accurately describing what the Babylonian province was called in 551 BC. The geographic area called Elam lies right in the middle between Babylon and Persia and just to the south of Media. Susa was essentially the county seat of Elam that was under Babylonian control at this time. But prior to Cyrus's conquering of Babylon in 539 BC, he conquered Susa and renamed the province Elam to Susania. And after this, Susa became one of the four capitals in the Persian Empire with Darius expanding Susa and made it the main capital in the empire. We read this in the book of Esther as it is the setting of the entire book. It was later conquered by Alexander in 331 BC that eventually became part of the Seleucid Empire until 147 BC when it finally broke free and became an independent state. Do you see the significance of this detail? Think about this from the critic's viewpoint. In their mind, the book was forged roughly in 163 BC, especially with this chapter, as you'll see why. So from their viewpoint, their anonymous author artificially presented chapter 8 as if it was coming from 551 BC, in the third year of a king, remind you, that no other historian ever else mentioned up to 163 BC. And then they put their fictional character Daniel in Susa that is over 1,000 miles away from Jerusalem and somehow accurately knew to call the area the province of Elam instead of the name that it went by for nearly 400 years after Cyrus conquered it. Do you really think it is possible to be that historically accurate coming from the critic's viewpoint? Because what gets really dumb with this viewpoint is that the critics will have to say that Daniel is filled with numerous historical errors surrounding the events of Antiochus at the same time that the book was supposedly being wrote. So think about the big picture here for a moment. The critic will have to concede that the book is amazingly accurate with these types of details that are portrayed almost 400 years before its authorship, but when it comes to the contemporary events of their own author's time, that he gets a bunch of things wrong. That's like me telling you all the details that are surrounding the jousting division in the Middle Ages statute of arms for tournaments in 1292, but for some reason, I can't tell you who won the Super Bowl last year. But for the sake of argument, let's just say that the critic is right. Do you think that the Jews would have still canonized it if it was filled with all these so-called historical errors? They could have at least corrected the errors, so nobody would have known about them, but they didn't do that. And yet, they still stuck it in their Bible with the likes of Jeremiah, Isaiah, and Ezekiel. Sorry, critics, your story just doesn't make any sense. And to add insult to injury on this, the author said that Daniel was by the river of Ulai. James Montgomery said that the Ulai can be best identified with an artificial canal which connects the rivers near Susa. Did you catch that? The Ulai is a man-made canal. So it's not like the author is mentioning the Euphrates River that everyone in the world would know about. He is mentioning a waterway that the Babylonians dug. So you can only make sense of this if it is coming from an eyewitness source. Verses 3 and 4. Then I lifted up my eyes and saw, and behold, there stood before the river a ram which had 2 horns, and the 2 horns were high, but one was higher than the other, and the higher one came up last. I saw the ram pushing westward and northward and southward, so that no beast might stand before him, neither were there any that could deliver out of his hand, but he did according to his will, and became great. So Daniel sees a ram with 2 horns, but one of them is described being higher than the other, with him pushing to the west, north, and south. But as we know, an angel interprets the vision for Daniel and tells him that the ram is the Medo-Persian Empire. So on our chart, the ram horizontally lines up with the bear as the second beast and the chest and arms of silver from the statue. And from their descriptions, we see perfect correspondence with one another. Verse 3 said that one of the horns was higher than the other, which is the same imagery from chapter 7, verse 5, that said that the bear raised up on one side higher than the other. This is an allusion to the one side that would end up being stronger of the 2 nations within the empire. With the ram, it is said that the stronger side came up last. This is in reference to the Persian side of the empire, as they would end up being the dominant side when Cyrus became its sole ruler. The next similarity is how the ram is described pushing in 3 directions, while the bear is said to have 3 ribs in its mouth. We remarked how the ribs could represent them conquering Lydia, Babylon, and Egypt. The ram confirms this, as it is said that it pushed to the west, north, and south. And both are described as becoming great by conquering anyone who stood in their way. And if you think about this, both animals' primary fighting tactic is that they both try to overpower their opponent by using brute strength. So, the horizontal alignment of the 3 textual visions fit. But here's the cool thing with Daniel being told that the Medo-Persian Empire is the ram. Rams were symbolically used throughout their time. Roman historian Marcellus wrote that Persian kings would wear an image of a ram's head in battle instead of their usual crown. But the truly neat piece to Daniel's vision is that Daniel was likely looking into the starry night that he could have been seeing the ram image emerging from the constellation Aries, which lo and behold is represented as a ram's horns in the zodiac that biblical scholar Keel observed is the guardian spirit of Persia. Now I hope that was worthy enough for you to go and hit the like button below. And if you haven't already, go and click on one of the subscribe buttons as well. It's free, and you're only going to keep getting great content like this throughout the whole ministry. But now for the goat, verses 5 through 7. And as I was considering, behold, a male goat came from the west on the face of the whole earth, and touched not the ground, and the goat had a notable horn between his eyes. And the goat came to the ram that had 2 horns, which I had seen standing before the river, and ran unto him in the fury of his power. And I saw him come close unto the ram, and he was moved with bitterness against him, and smote the ram, and broke his 2 horns. And there was no power in the ram to stand before him, but he cast him down to the ground, and stamped upon him, and there was none that could deliver the ram out of his hand. The angel declares that the goat is Greece. And as we demonstrated earlier, Daniel was likely seeing the ram appear in the Aries constellation that is attributed to Persia. Here too, the goat could be emerging from the Capricorn constellation, whose symbol is the horned goat that has been observed as the zodiacal sign of Greece and was even minted on their drachmas for centuries. The next thing that the angel tells him is that the great notable horn is the first king of Greece, which was Alexander the Great. So we can see the placement here with the goat in the same row as the leopard and the belly and thighs of brass. But Daniel's vision of the goat didn't end there. Verse 8. Therefore the goat became exceedingly great, and when he was strong, the great horn was broken off, and it from it came up 4 notable ones towards the 4 winds of heaven. And with this vision, the angel tells Daniel, now that the one being broken, whereas 4 stood up for it, 4 kingdoms shall stand up out of the nation, but not in his power. So the angel identifies the 4 new horns as 4 kingdoms that will emerge, and here's the key element to this, out of the Greek Empire nation, meaning that they are still attached and contained within the Greek Empire as sub-kingdoms. So you can see why critics really go after Daniel. There is no ambiguity here in chapter 8. The ram is identified with Media and Persia, the goat is Greece, the first notable horn is the first king, and the 4 new ones are the 4 kingdoms that come out of the Greek Empire. And all of this is exactly what is recorded in history. Greece conquered from the west to the east and all the way into the northwest parts of India. And the not touching of the ground signifies the extreme speed in which it conquered all these lands. That all occurred under its first king, who we all know is Alexander the Great. But as the prophecy declared, this conquering was done by defeating the Persian Empire's control of the Middle East under Alexander, who conquered the Persians in just a 3-year period in his early 20s. But he died early in life. That was also prophesied that at his height he would die. Then after his death, the Greek Empire split up into 4 sub-kingdoms towards the 4 cardinal directions. And this is exactly what took place with the Macedonian kingdom in the west, the Pergamum kingdom in the north, the Seleucid Empire in the east, and the Ptolemaic Empire in the south. And at the end of verse 22, it said, "but not in his power." This is saying that these kingdoms will never be as strong as they once were under Alexander. And history shows that for the next 48 years, the Greek Diadochi Wars took place, with these 4 kingdoms going at each other's throats in trying to become the #1 power within the empire. Now, if you think that is pretty amazing stuff, just wait until we get to chapter 11. And as also, we haven't even covered the little horn here in chapter 8 that also zooms in on one particular king out of one of these 4 sub-kingdoms. All of that will be covered in part 2 of our chapter 8 study. So let's finish seeing the connections between the leopard and the goat, and where the critical view fails once again with them trying to make Greece the 4th empire. Between the leopard and the goat, we see easy connections between these two. First, there is the connection between the 4 heads and the 4 horns being both the 4 sub-kingdoms that lie within the Greek Empire. Next, you have the 4 wings corresponding to the 4 winds of heaven that represent the 4 cardinal directions by which the 4 kingdoms would be divided up by. Next, we have the fact that the 3rd beast is a leopard, which is extremely fast, but then adding 4 wings to its back, that you got Superman speed going on here, which easily connects to the description of the goat not touching the ground, portraying the extreme speed that the Greeks would conquer the whole Middle East in just 3 years. And the one that binds them all together from all 3 visions is the description of them ruling over all the earth. So, hands down, this presented model fits coherently in its vertical and horizontal alignments pulled from the text, and also its matching of recorded history. From the visions, there is one more pattern that you might not have noticed here, and that is its numeric description of each empire. We saw it first with the 10 toes and 10 horns of the 4th empire. Then, between the bear and goat, both are said to have one side of them being raised higher than the other. This spoke of the unified empire between 2 nations. And you could say that this might have been alluded to by the 2 arms on the statue. Then we have the number 4 connected with the 4 heads, 4 wings, and 4 horns. Now I could stretch this a little bit by saying that this was represented by the quadriceps on the statue, but that might be going a little too far because of the brass belly reference, but maybe not. It's kind of fun to speculate from time to time. And as for Babylon, the number is 1, as in the head of gold, and the lion being the king of the jungle. So this is another way for us to see the horizontal alignment between all 3 visionary chapters. But on the other hand, the critical view only gets worse from here, because when we add in chapters 8, ram and goat, they would have to shift those down to the 3rd and 4th kingdoms. That totally throws off all of the consistent horizontal descriptions that we just saw, and creates numerous contradictions between all of them. Now, despite all of this, critics and even some believers still deny this layout. But 2 things that we've seen abundantly clear with this layout is first, the textual consistency between all the details. We never skipped over one single description. We just simply let the text of Daniel speak for itself, and we kept filling in the blanks as we went along. And second, is that Daniel told us directly who 3 of the 4 empires are. So there can be no more arguing over this from either the Christian or non-Christian perspective any longer. This isn't me invoking my scheme. This is exactly what Daniel said. Yeah, but Daniel didn't tell us that Rome was the 4th. Why is he silent on that if it's supposed to be so clear? Those are good questions to ask, but it's also part of the genius of God not to reveal this to Daniel. Because Rome was just a tiny city-state kingdom in the 6th century BC. So the mentioning of Rome wouldn't make any sense from this time period, which only adds to the list of internal indicators for early authorship. But by the time of the 2nd century BC, Rome was the dominant power by its expansion throughout Europe and the Near East by conquering and subjugating each kingdom in the Greek Empire over the course of nearly 200 years, that is represented on the 4 heads of the leopard and the 4 horns of the goat. Thus, Rome is the 4th beast who slowly conquered and devours and tramples each kingdom under its feet. A reminder to hit the subscribe button below, turn on the notification bell, hit the like button, and leave a comment. And don't forget to visit us at justscripture.org. In the meantime, stay salty.